Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel has mobilized tens of thousands of reservists as it prepares for a major assault on Gaza City while considering a new ceasefire proposal after nearly 2 years of war. The move signals Tel Aviv's determination to seize Gaza's largest urban hub, despite global criticism and warnings of mass Palestinian displacement. French President Emmanuel Macron says Israel's military push to seize Gaza City can only lead to a complete disaster for both peoples. He warns the operation and call-up of reservists will drag on the region into a permanent war, again urging an international stabilization mission. The Palestinian Authority says Israel's green light for a major settlement project in the E1 area of the West Bank destroys hopes for a two-state solution. It warns the plan will fragment the territory into isolated enclaves, calling them prisons that cut off geographical and demographic unity. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accuses European leaders of making clumsy attempts to sway US President Donald Trump's position on Ukraine. He said their meeting with Trump and President Zelensky offered no constructive ideas, only escalating rhetoric. Furthermore, the Kremlin downplays speculation of an imminent meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky, even as Donald Trump presses for direct talks to end the war. Trump, after hosting European leaders and Zelensky in Washington, admits the conflict is tough to resolve and warns Putin may not want a deal. Local officials say 3 people were killed and 4 wounded after Russian forces launched 8 rocket strikes on the city of Konstantinivka in the Donbass. The attack targeted a local market as Moscow's troops press to encircle the strategic eastern hub. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran cannot fully sever cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog, even after Parliament curbed inspections following June strikes on its nuclear facilities. He says inspectors must remain involved despite new laws requiring high-level security approval for future visits. Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in Lhasa for his second visit as leader to mark 6 decades since Beijing founded the Tibet Autonomous Region. Established in 1965, it followed the Dalai Lama's exile after a failed uprising became China's 5th and final autonomous region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses Australia's Anthony Albanese of betraying Israel and abandoning the Jewish community, calling him a weak politician. The diplomatic rift deepens after Canberra moves to recognise a Palestinian state. Now we start with the Middle East's defining crisis. French President Emmanuel Macron says Israel's planned offensive in Gaza would be disastrous and risks plunging the region into permanent war. Speaking after talks with Jordan's King Abdullah and Egypt's President el-Sisi, Macron urged a permanent ceasefire, the release of all hostages and large-scale humanitarian aid for Gazans. He called for Hamas to be disarmed and the Palestinian Authority strengthened, while proposing an international stabilization mission for Gaza. Macron confirmed that France will co-chair, alongside Saudi Arabia, a conference on the two-state solution in New York this September. He said that it is only the credible way forward for Palestinians, Israelis, and the families of hostages, ending with a call, no to war, yes to peace and security for all. We're now joined by Keith Vaz, who is a former UK minister, and he joins us live from Atlanta. Keith, thank you very much for joining us as always. There is domestic pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu and, of course, foreign pressure from Western governments, including France, including the United Kingdom, from Australia, etc., Keith. How do you think Israel is going to react? Do you think it minds all this international pressure, building upon it? We saw it react to the humanitarian crisis. These images were widespread. We saw them let aid into the enclave. However, when it comes to its military ambitions, do you think that Israel thinks differently?
Good morning, Thomas from Atlanta in Georgia. The fact is that Israel will continue to do what it wants to do unless the United States is involved and tells it to stop. As we saw with the recent Iran conflict, it's only when Donald Trump picks up the phone and makes that call do things change. As you know, the entire Israeli war machine is being funded by the American government. You cannot get the kind of sophisticated weapons that Israel has at its disposal without the massive amount of support that is being given as far as defense is concerned. So although you're right, we are living in very dangerous territory now. In the past, of course, the French president, the British prime minister, the German chancellor, all these other countries supported the right of Israel to defend itself. This goes one step too far. But the biggest issue is why the Arab countries are not doing exactly what the Europeans have done over over Ukraine, as we saw recently. And it's very interesting being in the United States at the moment and looking at the parallel between what is happening on Ukraine, where the European leaders traveled with President Zelensky to Washington to convince President Trump. We're not getting a similar move from the Arab world. I see no demands from the president of Egypt or the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia or the King of Jordan to say, hang on a minute, this is going to be a disaster. We're all getting on our planes and we're coming to Washington to ask you to put pressure on Netanyahu. There is only one person in the world who can do that, and that is Donald Trump. So you're right, there is isolation. It's on a scale that we've never seen before, but these are, to some extent, empty threats. Look, France is not going to do to Israel what it's proposing to do to Russia in Ukraine. So these at the moment are just words.
Keith, you speak about the relationship between Israel and the United States, and we obviously saw Joe Biden and Donald Trump, two opposites. However, what seems to unite them is their support for Israel. Now, a 2025 Gallup poll in July said that only 32% of Americans now support Israel's military action in Gaza. Now, these are the people who are, in the next 5-10 years, are going to have positions of power. Do you think Israel, in its current actions, risks isolating itself long term?
Thomas, let's be very clear. The reason why the Democrats and the Republicans are united in support of Israel is that the lobby in Washington is the most powerful and the most resourced lobby in the world, and that lobby supports Israel. So if you are running for re-election and your biggest supporters are people from the Israel AIPAC, you're going to be listening to whoever funds you. I'm afraid that's the reality of it all. Other issues do not come into consideration at this present time. So unless you have a new generation of people coming forward saying, we're not taking money from foreign powers. There was a very interesting program that I watched recently with Tucker Carlson, who is a MAGAite, talking to Ted Cruz about the amount of money that the Israeli lobby gave him. So these are issues that obviously go well beyond politics. That's why the parties are united.
Yes, Keith, fascinating. Thank you for that insight. However, we do have to move on, but to a related development. The Palestinian Authority has slammed Israel's approval of the E1 settlement project in the occupied West Bank, calling it a direct blow to the chances of a two-state solution. In a strongly worded statement, the PA's foreign ministry said the plan fragments the geographic and demographic unity of the West Bank, dividing it into isolated cantons and turning them into something akin to real prisons. Settlement building in E1 has been stalled for 2 decades under US pressure, but with Wednesday's approval, infrastructure could begin within months, deepening international concerns over the future of peace negotiations. We are once again joined by Keith Faz to discuss this further. Keith, what more can you tell us about settlements in the West Bank, and how important are they for Palestinian division, the prevention of a Palestinian state, and why is Israel allowed to do this, even though it is deemed illegal under international law?
It's completely illegal under international law. You cannot just knock on someone's door and say, by the way, I'd like to take over your house, or the scenes that we have witnessed of whole swathes of land being taken over. And as you say, the prediction is that this is about stopping the two-state solution. I believe very passionately in the two-state solution. I think Israel has a right to exist, so does international opinion, but also Palestine has a right to exist, and that's also the position of the international community. These settlements go way beyond protecting the borders of Israel and into a completely new area. That is why the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu is opposed with such massive numbers. If there was an election tomorrow, I'm absolutely certain that he would not be re-elected as Prime Minister. So I think that he should heed. He obviously is a wartime leader. Must be very difficult for people in Israel living in these circumstances where you spend all your time worrying about a war situation. And similarly for the people in Palestine, never knowing who is going to knock on your door tomorrow. What we saw with Trump and Ukraine, we need to see with Trump and the Middle East. Obviously, he can't have Hamas in the White House because they won't come. But we do need his input into this. He does need to do what he did with Putin in Ukraine, because the only person in town, the only country in town that controls the finances of this area is the United States. Donald Trump wanted to be a world leader. He is a world leader. The buck stops with him. But these settlements are totally against everything that one had expected in international law.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Keith. You are staying with us to discuss more West Asian updates. Syrian state media says a senior Islamic State commander has been killed in a US-led coalition raid in the town of Ataimi in northwestern Idlib province. The target was identified as Salah Numan, an Iraqi national known as Ali, described as one of IS's most dangerous figures. He was accused of mobilizing sleeper cells across Syria. Witnesses reported the raid took place shortly after midnight with the sound of aircraft and gunfire. Numan was reportedly shot dead after jumping from a balcony while his wives were arrested. Iraqi intelligence is said to have provided the lead for the operation. The coalition has not confirmed the strike, but it follows a series of recent raids in Idlib targeting Islamic State operatives. Though this was territorial defeated years ago, its fighters still remain a presence in Syria's deserts and launch periodic attacks. Let's listen in to what the building's owner had to say.
الساعة 2:30 تقريبا بالليل سمعنا أصوات برا طلعنا لبرا ولا كان التحالف برا صاروا ينادوا استسلم استسلم وارفع ايديك مو مسلمت حالي كنت انا اول واحد بطلع من البيت فصرت نادي لاهلي صاروا يقولوا لي طبعا في اللي كان عم يحكي لهجته عراقية المترجم صار عم استسلم استسلم وارفع ايديك قالوا نادي لاهلك ناديت لكل شيء موجود جوا طلعوا لبرا.
We are once again joined by Keith Faz. Keith, obviously, sanctions were lifted in Syria after Donald Trump did so after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. However, we now see reports that what many people feared, that IS is still operating in small areas of the country. What does this say about the stability of Syria, the way that terrorists can function in that region?
Well, what it says, Thomas, is that Syria is still unstable. The removal of the Assad regime and the election, not the election, the appointment of this new government, there have been no elections, President Trump going over and shaking hands, etc., with a new leader has not meant that Syria is stable. And we are witnessing that with what the Americans have done. It's not just the Americans, it's also a coalition. I imagine the Arab nations were also part of this, trying to destroy the base of IS. You can't really kill the beast. We found with Middle East policy, you might chop off one head, but another monster grows. So I don't know who this person is. I don't know what role he has. We only tend to know about these people after they are dead and after they are described as being the most terrible people who've ever walked the earth. But we have to believe what we are told. Otherwise, there's no point in watching the news or listening to any briefings. They say he's a bad man. They say they've taken him out. But what it shows is that there are still major problems in Syria. The Syrian government does not control Syria. There are different factions, and it does pose a threat and a risk to the other people who live there. Diplomacy does not work in a case of this kind because there's no one to negotiate with. You can't invite the leader of IS to come and to visit us in the White House or wherever. You have to deal with them in this way. But I think what it does show is there are real problems coming Syria's way in the future. This particular story is not over.
Keith Vaj, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking up the time. We now move on once again. German officials stress strong security guarantees in potential Ukraine-Russia peace talks. Deputy spokesperson Stefan Meyer said Germany is committed to constructive dialogue with European partners, the US and Ukrainian President Zelensky. He warned any deal must show Moscow is serious about peace and not allow Russia to regroup or pursue aggressive objectives. Economy Ministry spokesperson Susan Ungrad added that further trade barriers must be avoided following US announcement of higher steel and aluminium tariffs. Germany stresses this process must succeed for Ukraine and European security. Listen in to what the government deputy spokesperson Stefan Meyer has stated.
Und deshalb ist, glaube ich, wichtig, nach dem, was wir jetzt die letzten Tage gesehen haben, Putin muss jetzt liefern. Putin muss zeigen, dass er ein ernsthaftes Interesse an einem Friedensschluss hat. Wir setzen darauf, dass wir diesen Prozess wirklich zu einem Erfolg führen, für die Ukraine zu einem Erfolg führen, für die europäische Sicherheit zu einem Erfolg führen. Und so habe ich die Aussagen des Bundeskanzlers verstanden. Wir sind grundsätzlich ja im ständigen Austausch, nicht nur in den letzten Tagen, sondern es wird sicherlich fortlaufend auch so sein. Einerseits mit den europäischen Partnern, mit Präsident Zelensky, aber auch mit der US-Seite, jetzt auch weitere konkrete Schritte auch zu unternehmen, zum Beispiel Sicherheitsgarantien konkret auszubuchstabieren. Da stehen wir jetzt am Anfang von einem sicherlich längerfristigen Prozess. Wir bleiben in diesem gesamten Prozess konstruktiv und hoffen, wie gesagt, dass Wladimir Putin sich bewegt.
We're now joined by Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, who's a senior strategic and defence expert. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us here on the programme. Germany and also Europe made a breakthrough yesterday when it came to the Washington talks. They pitched to Donald Trump security guarantees and they got a maybe. Donald Trump said that Ukraine might be protected from the air from the United States, but he did rule out boots on the ground. How important is this, and also the push of security guarantees on the region?
Thanks, Thomas, and nice to see you back. My best wishes. The most important aspect, see, if this ceasefire has to take place, let us understand the position of Ukraine and let us also understand the position of Russia. What are the concerns of Ukraine? What are the concerns of Russia? And once we understand the concerns of these two countries, I think a ceasefire may be a possibility, because right now I don't think it is a possibility. Why I actually say is because a first aspect is, before coming to the German foreign minister and spokesperson statements, uh, the first and foremost is that a reality that Russia has captured almost 20% of Ukraine. Under no circumstances would Russia agree to give back this territory, because it has been taken after a lot of blood and toil. There have been so many casualties of the Russians and the Ukrainians at the same time. But the victor has been Russia, and Russia will not be able to go back on that. So in case we take that as a position of ceasefire talks, that Russia is going to keep this 20% of this territory, what we do, what we have to give to Ukraine, because it has to be a situation where the Ukraine also has to be given certain concessions, because when a ceasefire takes place, it is with the agreement of both the parties. So now the importance of the German viewpoint, that certain kind of security guarantees have to be built in, because without that, I don't think Ukraine is going to agree, and Putin will have to accept, because in case Putin wants a ceasefire, he will have to give in to certain security guarantees. Now I divide these guarantees into three parts. So, one is the military guarantees, the other is the diplomatic or the political guarantees, and the third is the economic and the reconstruction guarantees. Because these are those three areas which Ukraine is also looking into. What stops Russia from attacking Ukraine after a couple of months of resting its troops, regrouping its resources, and again starting the offensive? So these security guarantees are very, very important from that point of view, because there is a lack of trust. It's very important when you have a ceasefire and when you don't have trust, so you have to build in certain assurances and guarantees, for which the United States has to play a very important role. Military guarantees, I would actually say, is that a long-term weapon supplies will have to continue to Ukraine, in terms of advanced air defense, in terms of artillery, in terms of drones, something like what the US and Israel enjoy. That kind of relationship has to be built in as far as Ukraine is concerned, because it cannot be any ad hocism, and it cannot be at the whims and fancies. If Trump decides that I don't want to give you anything right now, no, it cannot be done like this. It has to be a guarantee.
Major.
The second is the training commitments. The permanent training.
Major General, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We are very, very limited on time. Apologies. We have to move on to our next story. Thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us. We now move over to China, where it will stage a massive military parade in Beijing next month to mark 80 years since the end of World War II. The September the 3rd Victory Day event will showcase weapons never seen before, from hypersonic missiles and precision strike systems to new tanks, drones and early warning aircraft. Military officials say the 70-minute parade will feature 45 troop formations and hundreds of aircraft, with President Xi Jinping presiding at Tiananmen Square alongside foreign dignitaries, including Russia's Vladimir Putin. The display, only the second such commemoration since 2015, is seen as a powerful projection of China's military strength at a time of heightened regional tensions. Western nations are expected to watch closely, wary of Beijing's growing assertiveness. Security has been stepped up in the capital, with rehearsals involving tens of thousands of troops, police and civilians. Chinese officials insist the parade also highlights the country's role as a peace-loving nation. Let's listen in to what Xu Zonghong, the senior officer of the Central Theatre of Command of the People's Liberation Army, has said.
兵有很多新设计、新特点。参阅官兵来自不同类型单位，首次亮相的新型武器装备占比非常高，而且装备方队和空中梯队大多是混合编组，这些都给今年阅兵的训练和保障提出了很。
We're now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at the Hudson Institute and he joins us live from Tokyo, Japan. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. As we build up to this event, what kind of military capabilities does China have and what can we expect from this event in terms of military advancement from Beijing?
Showing the strength is very important for China to show that China is strong and Taiwan should be the part of China. But at the same time, there are three purposes that China has in this event. Firstly, of course, the strength, the power of China as a great power, something like that. But the second one is to legitimize this power or rapid military modernization. Because China want to emphasize their fighter against the threat, which was Japan. So Japan exists, and China can legitimize their rapid military modernization, even if it's faster than any other country around China. So that's why this is the second purpose. And the third purpose, indeed very important, because in the World War II, China cooperated with the United States. So that is very important under the escalating the US-China competition. So China is friend of the United States, and US should not escalate the competition. That is China want to say.
Dr.
But
Nagao.
important. Can I say?
Of course, yes, apologies.
Okay. We should remember the one fact. In the World War II, Chinese government was not a communist government. Currently, this government is located in Taiwan, not China. So that's why so China say they win the World War II, but reality is a little bit ambiguous in this case. The real government was located in Taiwan that time. Anyway, that is a fact.
Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insight, as always. We now move over to Europe, where wildfires in northern and western Spain have devastated almost as much land in the past 24 hours as all of last year. However, the end of a 16-day heat wave and expected rainfall have raised hopes for a possible end. The fires have spread across Extremadura, Galicia, Castile and Leon, leading authorities to halt rail services, close roads and block a 50-kilometre section of the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage trail. According to reports, the fires have burned vegetation on 38,000 hectares since Monday, just below 42,000 hectares during the whole of 2024.
Consideramos que nos presentamos ante un escenario más favorable en cuanto a la evolución de los incendios, basándonos en ese principio de que se mantienen estables el número de incendios, pero baja la participación de la unidad militar de emergencia. La situación en estos momentos es que hay 21 incendios activos en situación operativa 2 en estos momentos y en los que están interviniendo los distintos medios del Estado. En cuanto al número de incendios, se mantiene estable, lo que sí es que ha bajado las solicitudes de activación de la unidad militar de emergencias en dichos incendios.
Sí que es cierto que desde el lunes 18 las condiciones han ido mejorando progresivamente, poco a poco, no ha sido un cambio brusco, pero sí que poco a poco, de oeste a este, han ido mejorando las condiciones meteorológicas.
We're now joined by Bharati Chaturvedi. He's the founder and director of Chintan Environmental NGO, and she joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Bharati. Europe is heating up at an unprecedented rate. Why is this, Bharati? We've seen wildfires go across the Mediterranean over the past month or so, rising at a rate not seen before. What is the reason for this?
Well, the whole world has seen some of the hottest years ever recorded in the last few years. But the additional problem is that the oceans are heating up, and the Mediterranean is more than a degree warmer than it used to be, which means it cannot absorb the heat the way it used to be. And so all those things are of the past, such as the cool Mediterranean breeze, because we're no longer capable of experiencing the Mediterranean ocean. Its entire system has failed or is collapsing because of climate change. And I think these fires are only a signal that at COP30 this year in Brazil, we have to treat this as an emergency and have to have a lot more done. You can't just have climate negotiations with no results, because then whether it's people in India, where we've also had unprecedented rain and unprecedented floods and unprecedented heat, or Spain, which is just devastated with those wildfires. We're not only losing forest cover and assets, what we're also getting is intense air pollution, a lot of money that's going to go into people's health, loss of productivity, and unfortunately these fires are coinciding with a global biodiversity collapse. So it's actually very, very serious, but it won't stop unless we're able to get something done around globally and as one world around climate change in these negotiations in Brazil at COP30, because we failed quite badly in the last few years.
Bharati, so you're saying that we'll be seeing much more of this. Wondering if you could give us an insight about who will be the most affected when it comes to climate change events like this.
Well, it's always the most vulnerable, and typically whether it's Spain or whether it's India or whether it is in fact the United States, we see repeatedly it's the poor, because the poor have the least assets to keep them resilient. So whether it's fisher folk who depend on the oceans, particularly artisanal and traditional fisher folk, whether it is the poor who live in slums or informal housing, or as we saw, communities and people of color and those kinds of people who have always been marginalized or who live off natural resources like the ocean, and people who live off forests or depend on it, or who live nearby and who cannot really go very far away because their work is there. These are the kinds of people, the more or less invisible people who run so much of our economies. They really go down and they lose all their assets, they lose their money, they lose their health. And many of them are not necessarily covered by social protection. So we are looking at a catastrophic month ahead, or 2 months or 3 months, particularly if you look at air pollution, because air pollution actually has intergenerational impacts. And we know that this kind of wildfire isn't going to be only about the neighborhood or Spain. It's going to go where the winds take it. And the whole world is impacted by Spain's wildfires.
Bharati Chaturvedi, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to get your insight. Well, we move on finally, where Kneecap member Mo Kara was welcomed by hundreds of fans and supporters upon arriving for his second court appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court today. Fans chanted "Free Mo Kara," waving Palestinian flags. He was accompanied by his bandmates And prosecutors claim the 27-year-old waved a flag supporting the proscribed terrorist organisation Hezbollah at a gig in London of last November. During the 3-hour hearing, his defence team argued that the case should be dismissed due to a technical error. Defence counsel Brenda Campbell, KC, told the court that the Attorney General had not granted permission for the case to proceed after police informed him of the terror charge on the 21st of May. However, prosecutor Michael Bisgrove stated that permission was not required until the defendant's first court appearance. Chief Magistrate Paul Goldspring announced that the case was adjourned. Mo Farah has not entered a plea but has denied any wrongdoing. He has been released on unconditional bail once again and now faces a month-long wait to learn if his terrorism charge will be dropped. He is scheduled to appear in court again on the 26th of September. Let's hear what he has to say.
Obviously, it's great to see the support out here. We know this story is more than just about me. It's more than Kneecap. This is a story about Palestine and us as a distraction from the real story. We know, unfortunately, this story will end up in the media today while Israel commits genocide at the same time. So everybody, continue to speak about Palestine. Free Palestine. Thank you all for coming. Chucky Ireland. Appreciate it. Obviously, it's great to see the support out here. We know this story is more than just about me. It's more than Kneecap. This is a story about Palestine and us as a distraction from the real story. We know, unfortunately, this story will end up in the media today while Israel commits genocide at the same time. So everybody, continue to speak about Palestine. Free Palestine. Thank you all for coming. Chucky Ireland.
Well, that is all that we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.